We take you now to Ottawa.
The Prime Minister of Canada, the Right Honourable W.L. Mackenzie King.
At 3:30 this morning, the government received official word that the invasion of Western Europe had begun. Word was also received that the Canadian troops were among the Allied forces who landed this morning on the northern coast of France. Canada will be proud to learn that our troops are being supported by units of the Royal Canadian Navy and the Royal Canadian Air Force.
August 18th, 1944. The war in Europe is drawing to a close. Mile by mile, town by town, the Allied forces liberate France from the iron occupation of the Nazis. With the German army surrounded at Falaise, they attempt a desperate retreat through a hole in the Allied line, known as the Falaise Gap. Exposed and on the run, they are fodder for Allied bombing. In the sky above Cercoux, the Spitfires of the Royal Canadian Air Force's 401st Squadron relentlessly pummel the rows of German vehicles below, receiving a hail of flak in return. Gripping the stick of one of those Spitfires is Flight Lieutenant Charles Ernest Fairfield.
Tremendous individual, personality plus, and the gift of flying. He was number one in his course of training and so on.
He watches as his flight lead, Hugh Traynor, is hit by flak and bails out, and his fighter goes down in flames. Charles prepares to execute another dive when he is interrupted by a sharp crunch and a fierce impact. Whatever thoughts went through his mind as he was wrenched from the sky he so loved and hurtled towards the earth, we will never know. This is the story of Charles Fairfield. Born on April 13th, 1923 in England, Charles Fairfield moved with his parents to Canada at a young age. The Fairfields settled down in North Toronto, which was still largely rural at the time, and had a second son who they named George.
Charles Fairfield was my father's older brother, and my father, George, looked up to him. He followed him around with his Charles's friends when he was a kid, and learned so much from Charles growing up. And so I know that he was very close to my father's heart.
The two were also linked by a shared interest in the sky. For George, it was birds, but for Charles, it was aviation.
When Charlie was in his teens, he cleared an area in the basement, set up a big table, and started building model airplanes from balsa wood and special paper. His early models were powered with wind-up elastic bands. He later graduated to small gasoline engines.
It was therefore fitting when, on July 4th, 1941, Charles joined the Royal Canadian Air Force. Upon the invasion of France in 1944, he was assigned to the 401st Tactical Fighter Squadron, also known as the Rams, and sent off to Europe.
It was an awful scene. It was the highway of death after the Gulf War.
Then, on one fateful sortie, it happened. On the 18th of August, 1944, Flight Lieutenant Charles Ernest Fairfield was killed in action when his aircraft was struck by flak and crashed in the town of Cercoux, France.
George's family was one of those traditional British families in the sense of not talking about things. And George carried that grief until the day he died.
The dead of World War II occupy a hallowed place in our cultural memory. A heroic collective who laid down their lives to stop the vicious advance of fascism. And yet, behind that collective lived thousands of individuals, remembered first and foremost as such by those who knew them.
I think this is how Charlie should be remembered in the stories that my dad told in this book.
And so, let us not only remember Flight Lieutenant Charles Ernest Fairfield, but let us remember Charlie.